Okay, maybe I won't. I lost my documents. That's fine. That's fine. Right, it is 19:02. Let's kick this off. Welcome, everybody. My name is Zofia Reych. I'm the director at the Women's Bouldering Festival. We are joined today by Electra Zacharias, who is a long-time climber, competition climber, climbing instructor, and activist for trans inclusivity in climbing and beyond. And Electra will talk today about this issue. After, you are welcome to ask questions, pop them in the Q&A at the bottom, and I will choose a few for Electra to ask, or Electra will choose depending how many come. And yeah, we'll raffle some prizes from our sponsors at the end of this, so stay tuned for that. And I also will say a huge thank you to Patagonia, who makes these live sessions possible. And other than that, I think I can hide myself and leave you in the hands of Electra. And do let me know if anything is wrong, like audio or view needs to be changed. You can always drop it in the chat at the bottom, plus I'm listening on. So I disappear. Enjoy, okay. Electra.
Thank you. So also a warm welcome from my side, and thank you to Zof and the Women's Bouldering Festival for this opportunity today to talk about trans inclusion, not only in climbing, but beyond. I will use my personal experience a bit as a trans climber to talk specifically about the trans community, but many things I will say will also apply to the broader context of trans inclusion in sports. About me as a person, like I'm, as Zofia said, I'm a longtime climber and human rights advocate. And but this human rights advocacy will be a bit on the side. I will try to focus mostly on the climbing side of me. So let's start with a small introduction about me as a climber. So I chose this picture actually because I think it's quite funny. It was completely unintended. I was just lazy to do the second hand, but it fits the topic of the talk quite well, because I will talk about my experiences having been perceived as a cis climber before and now as a trans climber, to talk about the difficulties trans climbers encounter and also the difference in treatment we often have as trans athletes. I will structure this in a way that I will talk later about climbing gyms, the outdoors, and then lastly about competitions. So yeah, I said I'm a long-time climber. So I started climbing when I was 9 years old. You can maybe see on the picture on the top left, like some of you might recognize the holds, but let me tell you, they're old and they were heavy to set with, especially. This is a picture from my first competition when I was 12, and yeah, I just spent basically all my youth in climbing gyms and outdoors. Some pictures from Mallorca and from Spain, like from other parts in Spain. And I have a special relationship with Fontainebleau, I think, a bit, because I came every summer of my youth there for basically a month and a half. Yeah, my skin suffered a lot in the summer heat, but it was still very nice. And that's until here, climbing for me was really nice. Like being a kid and climbing, growing up and climbing, it's really an environment where you don't care much about gender itself. You just go and climb. I mean, you go to the climbing gym with other kids and you just hang out and climb. It doesn't really matter if you're a boy or a girl. You just go to the boulder or to the lead route and just be like, yeah, let's do it. Then increasingly, like I was starting to feel uncomfortable with the environment I was in mostly, and like I had always this like feeling that I already knew quite early that I was trans, but didn't tell anybody. But I was increasingly getting the feeling with like people going into puberty and interactions becoming more gendered, I was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. And for a long time, climbing sort of helped as a coping mechanism for this. For example, the coping mechanism for bullying that I suffered in school because of transphobic and homophobic attacks that were there. But when then climbing became also more gendered, also more exclusive in a way that you had like groups of girls, groups of guys climbing, it became less and less fun for me, and this coping mechanism basically went away. And so this led to me like stopping climbing when I was around 19. I like stopped climbing entirely. I didn't have fun in it anymore. I just was like, it coincided with the fact that I was going to university, and yeah, and then I was gone from climbing for 6 years. But the story doesn't really end here. I started then again, like when I was 27, I was going outside with my girlfriend, a bit doing easy multi-pitches and just getting fun around it. And I think also one thing that helped, that there were, like, even though there were still very few, there were more and more role models and people in sports that were trans. At the time, I was then already out, that were present. So I could see like, oh, I'm not alone. There are others that going through similar things. And through this way, I sort of slowly created myself a network of support, which helped me to re-enjoy climbing. And I want to use this today actually to show that my story now that I'm now talking to you is unfortunately still exceptional in a way, that you need strong support around you in order to be able to be welcome in our spaces. Like, for example, the picture on the right, I kind of like it. It was my last competition up today, like, thanks to COVID. I hope it will not be the last, also, although I'm getting quite old now, where I was still competing in the male category, but already out. And it was still quite a nice atmosphere, but also because like I had friends around me, they knew me. And I will use this talk also to talk about the importance of having this support in the community. Especially that in the climbing community, we often like to think of ourselves as very open-minded and inclusive community. And therefore, sometimes I think don't challenge our thinking enough, and disregarding the fact that in the end we're just still a community that is mostly dominated by abled white cis men. And like, I think this program, for example, at the Women's Bouldering Festival, the virtual program, helps to challenge these pre-assumptions. And I will try today to give you a few tools to maybe make it more inclusive, our community more inclusive for trans people. But before we're doing this, I think it's necessary maybe to go through a very short, I promise I keep it short, terminology explanation. So this is also for you to, if you have questions later, to be like, have the right vocabulary at hand. So I noted down 4 things. A transgender person are people, like transgender people are people whose gender identity is different from the gender they were assigned at birth. For example, I was assigned male at birth, but I identify as a female. So that's why I'm transgender. Non-binary people are people whose gender cannot be defined within the margins of the gender binary. I would like to say at this point that the 2 terms before are not exclusive. For example, I identify as a trans woman, but I also identify as non-binary. But there are people who are non-binary who don't identify as trans, and then trans people who identify as binary. But I just wanted to give this as an explanation before we move on. Cisgender people are people whose gender identity matches the gender they were assigned at birth. So if you're happy with the gender identity that was assigned to you at birth, you're most likely cis. A small explanation why I introduce intersex here. This will become important when we talk about competitions, because the same rules that are relevant for intersex people often apply also to trans people. So intersex people are people that are born with a reproductive or sexual anatomy that doesn't seem to fit the typical definitions of female or male. This can be like hormonal imbalances, anatomical differences, etc. Okay, enough with the relatively dry explanation, and let's go into trans inclusion in climbing gyms. Probably a place where a lot of us spend most of our time, free time. So, yeah, I'm also full-time working, so not so much time anymore. Okay, then I want first to talk a bit about sports in general. Like, there are very few trans and non-binary people in sports. And the question really is, why is it like this? And the simple answer is, it's a very hostile environment. There's a lot of bullying and harassment going on. It starts early in school sports, for example, when, like, often, unfortunately still today in many countries, boys and girls are separated for sports, and changing rooms are different genders. And so, yeah, this is, and just, it has never been, I think, a good place in sports to be LGBTQI. Unfortunately, still not today. But there's also some progress. This year, we had the first openly trans and non-binary athletes at the Olympic Games. There was Laurel Hubbard in the weightlifting category, a trans woman from New Zealand. And there was even the first medal winner, Quinn, who was a non-binary athlete competing in the Canadian soccer team, which I think won bronze. But this is quite new that now we have this role model. When I first realized that I might be trans, there were absolutely no athletes. It was basically unimaginable to be a trans athlete. So we see the small progress, but we also see a lot of attacks at the moment. Groups originating, like groups are mostly active in the UK, but also the US, attack trans inclusion in sports under the veil of protecting women's rights. And this touches particularly competitive sports, but also has effects on amateur sports, where there are more and more instances of direct assault against trans people in gyms. I'm not talking about climbing gyms now, but in gyms in general and other sporting facilities that are gendered. Therefore, I think that one of the most important things today is representation and community empowerment. And by community empowerment, I mean, we need to start in our communities. As climbers, we need to look in the climbing world. How can we empower those who are trans and non-binary and make the place a more inclusive space for everyone? Okay, I will talk a bit about the atmosphere in climbing gyms. I think, like, we're the Women's Festival. We all know how cis male dominated these spaces are. But this experience is particularly heavy for trans and non-binary people who are, like, really, who have no support. They're basically, if there are no other trans and non-binary climbers in your group, it's really hard to find support and be confident enough to go to the gym. And I think this is, like, initiatives like this festival, the Women's Bouldering Festival, that are expressively inclusive, that say we are inclusive, are extremely vital to give people the confidence to come. For example, I just mentioned from my personal life, I recently moved city. I moved from Leiden in the Netherlands to Geneva. And it's super hard as a trans person to arrive in a new gym. Like, people look at you, people don't really dare to approach you because they're a bit unsure about how to approach you. And I think that most of this even happens unconsciously. Like, there's no, like, not necessarily anything like that they want you, that they're ill-spirited or something like this. It just happens unconsciously that if you're trans, people don't really dare to make a step towards you. And therefore, it's really hard to get into contact with others at climbing gyms. And often trans people just come once, they try out once and go back, and they will never come back because they just feel unwelcome. And yeah, this is just very disappointing in a community that wants to be open. Another thing that contributes to this, I think, are gendered interactions. Like even innocent interactions, like encouragements to say like, come on, bro, vamos, chica, can be hurtful, even when they're not intended to be. Other examples would be like, for example, if you say somebody, oh, this is a girl's boulder, no wonder you're good on it. For a transmasculine person, this might be quite harmful if they hear it in the first place. Therefore, I think it's important that we clearly position ourselves. And I will give you a few best practices at the end of the talk, how we can make this atmosphere better. Maybe a funny but scary anecdote from the climbing gyms. When I started to transition, people started to interact very differently with me. While before I was often asked for advice on boulders, people suddenly started like mansplaining me boulders that I was warming up on. And so yeah, this really just is, as an example, is quite nice, not nice, of course, sorry, but it's quite powerful, I think, to see how gendered we are in our interactions at climbing gyms. The last point I want to talk about when regarding gyms are gendered facilities. And having gendered facilities, changing rooms, bathrooms, often leads to people trying to police who can enter them and who has the right to be there. This can lead to harassment. It happened to me many times, for example, that I went to a bathroom and when asked, oh, isn't this the women's bathroom? Or even like then, if you then go to the male bathroom, for example, in my case, people will ask you, oh, isn't this the men's bathroom? So it's really hard for you to find, you don't feel welcome in either place. So I think I will talk about it a bit more in detail later, that gender neutral facilities are really the way forward. And this is a huge obstacle with regards to any sport. Basically, if you have to come, like, for example, you can't change there, as trans people then will often change at home or just not come, basically. I mean, for a long time, I was just changing at home for most gyms, just out of fear of having to go to the bathroom or to the changing room. And in 99, or in, let's say 90%, probably nothing would happen. But the few times it happens might destroy your confidence immensely and your confidence in society. I want just to say, like, from my own experience, it's okay to come out in a gym where you're established. But this should not be the case for everybody. I mean, you should be able to come to a gym where you don't know anybody and not need to rely on the goodwill of the staff, basically, or the other climbers around. And I think that's something we need to work on. Okay, now we'll talk about trans inclusion at the crack. It will be a bit shorter section, and I will mostly talk about physical security, which is, I think, very straightforward at this point. Like, being trans simply isn't safe in our society. Being a woman isn't safe, and being a trans isn't either. Being trans isn't safe either. And like, we trans people suffer among the highest rates of physical abuse. And for example, for me, before like being visibly out, so speaking, traveling alone was never a problem. And now every time I do it, it's risky, and I try to avoid it. I try to always travel with people I know and not stay alone on campsites, for example. And like, for example, now I'm coming to the Women's Bouldering Festival alone, but I know that there are like people that take care of that there's no discrimination happening. So it's important to have these environments, and it's important to acknowledge that. So if you know trans people and tell them, yeah, just come there and come there. Think also about like what this can be a stressful experience for them, and maybe make arrangement for them to travel with them. Because the bubbles we have indoors in our gyms that we can construct ourselves don't necessarily translate into the outdoors. The outdoors, we are prone to attacks. Another thing regarding the outdoors is there's a big lack of representation in the outdoor world in general of trans and non-binary athletes, and normalizing their presence through inclusion, I think, would help a lot to bolster this representation. And for example, this is also really important to have like festivals like this one, where you expressively aim at creating inclusive atmospheres. A last point, it's a relatively small one, but think about root names. I think it's something every minority has already encountered when they climb for long enough. The number of discriminatory root names is really kind of mind-boggling. You don't see it at the first place, but if you really like go through guidebooks sometimes, and yeah, there's so much ableism, so much racism, sexism going on, and yeah, I will, not to trigger anybody, I won't mention any of these names, but really, if your first ascension is think about your root name and who, if your joke really needs to be hurtful to somebody. And the problem with this is also that like root names like this then enable others to use the words and joke about sensitive issues. Okay, now we come to the contentious one. It's trans inclusion in competitions. So there's a lot of misinformation on trans participation in competitions going on, especially when it concerns trans feminine people competing in female sports. People are very polarized, and suddenly cis men start to be interested in women's sports, cry about fairness, and yeah, and the articles that we see in mainstream media are often very badly researched and create an atmosphere of fear against trans competitors. And this has really created a super hostile environment for competitions. For example, when Laurel Hubbard was competing in the Olympics in the women's weightlifting, I think there were like 4 quite heavily condemning articles on the Guardian website in a week. So, and they all cited some studies that work without any scientific proofs, just saying that it's unfair that trans women would retain an athletic advantage, and that trans women would have a high testosterone level, which is for many trans women not true. Like trans people who hormonally transition often undergo hormone replacement therapy, whereby then their hormones that were naturally produced by their bodies are then replaced with hormones of the gender they feel more like they feel more closer to. For example, trans feminine people would lower their testosterone level with testosterone blockers and heighten their estrogen level with like pills or gels or whatever meme you use. And transmasculine people are administered testosterone, like to do the opposite effect. And this results often, for example, that trans women even have lower testosterone levels than cisgender women. Like, for example, for me, it's like my testosterone level are almost undetectable as of now. Just, I want to stop maybe a second here and say that not all trans people feel the need or want to medically or hormonally transition. And it's really important to acknowledge that that doesn't make them any less trans. So if somebody doesn't want to medically transition, I think it's important for us to not police their bodies and just say like, okay, this is you're still woman, man, non-binary, agender person, whatever you feel is most aligned to you. And another thing that is important is to acknowledge there are variation in hormonal levels for cis people as well. I think it was quite interesting in the earlier talk on how to do our training cycles based on hormonal cycles. And this acknowledgement that for everybody hormonal levels vary is really important with regards to the guidelines I'm talking about now. So the guidelines on trans inclusion of the IFSC are quite vague, for example. I just cited the IFSC, but they refer to the International Olympic Committee rules in these guidelines. So the IOC policy statement on gender identity and transsexuality, also quite outdated name by now, reads as follows. The IFC should treat a transgender person as a belonging to the sex in which they present, unless this might give the transgender person an unfair advantage or would be a risk to the safety of competitors. So here we can see these two elements that are often put forward when talking about trans inclusion in sports is on the one side fairness and on the other side safety. Unfortunately, they are quite vague indicators. So the current guidelines then sent to the IOC guidelines, which say that a trans feminine athlete must demonstrate that their total testosterone level in serum has been below 10 nanomoles for at least 12 months prior to her competition. It should be underlined here that this rule with the 10 nanomoles per liter has so far only been applied to cis women, like only has been used to bar cis women from competing in the international, in the Olympics, for example. There was the most notable case was, maybe you heard about it, Kester Semenya, runner from South Africa, who's intersex and has naturally high testosterone levels. And she would be obliged basically to take testosterone blockers that would affect her health quite detrimentally in order to participate in the Olympics. But she is a cis woman. She was assigned a female at birth. And I won't go too much into detail on this one, but there's a quite heavy aspect of racial discrimination, because high testosterone levels are often found in Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So maybe if you're interested in this, I would encourage you to read on this one on your own after this. But it's quite stagnant. Like Semenya, and I think there was several other cis women from Africa were about competing in the Tokyo Games based on these testosterone rules. Another thing that's important to say here is that for transmasculine people, there are no restrictions to participate in competitions. There are no hormonal guidelines they need to meet. Like now after the games, the IOC wants to review these guidelines, and we are not really sure in which direction it's going to go, but most likely the IOC is going to give more freedom to individual sporting associations and federations, which might prove problematic in certain instances. As for example, World Rugby has, I think it was beginning of last year, banned trans women from participating in their competitions if they have gone through male puberty in brackets, because just gone through first puberty. And this is quite problematic because it basically excludes most trans people. And I think the IOC should take a stronger stance against such exclusionary policies. Another example of such policies, for example, it's again rugby. UK Rugby has had this year a proposal on doing safety checks on trans women over the size of 1.80 meters or like more than 90 kilograms of weight, like completely arbitrary. But for example, if you're a cis woman, you didn't have to go through, and you're over 180 or 90 kilos, you don't have to go through these security tests. It's not really clear how they want to test this as of now. But yeah, we'll see how this will evolve with the IOC and individual sporting associations, also how the IFSC will position themselves after the new guidelines of the IOC. Then something I wanted to talk about where I don't really have a clear answer to, but which is, I think, good food for thought, is the inclusion of non-binary athletes in competitions. And I mean, so far, non-binary athletes have to choose one binary category in which they will participate. This will often be on the basis of their hormonal values, because these are the rules that are basically only in place as of now. But this, I think, could open an interesting discussion about maintaining binary categories for sports in general. I think it was quite interesting. I was following the Paralympics quite a lot, and there were actually quite a few examples of mixed competitions, which I think could be an inspiration also for able competitions. So yeah, there's no perfect answer there, but there's a lot to play around with. And I think climbing is a particularly interesting sport to do so, because like our sports relies a lot on like our weight strength ratio. So I think there's often, like, for example, like it was recently a quite striking example when I think it was Stefano Ghisolfi who went to, like, he tried some competitions route from the finals in, I think it was maybe Briançon, I'm not sure exactly, but he tried the male and the female routes of the finals, and he actually thought the female route was harder. And another example of this was, I think it's a long time ago, I think maybe it was 2004 or 2006 in Pures World Cup. I was present, and there was the male final was used as a super final. At the time there were super finals for the girls, and I think Johanna Ernst at the time climbed the men's route that had not been climbed in the men's final before, and there were just a few adjustments in the footholds made. So I think climbing can be really an interesting playground to try out different competition formats and see how it goes. Especially like in open competitions, I think with a diverse route setting, you can achieve a quite level playing field. Okay, so I want to end this on a bit more of a positive note, and propose some things that we can do as a community to make our spaces more inclusive. The first thing I think this is really important is just listen to trans and non-binary people in the community. Like, when a trans person or non-binary person calls something out as transphobic or ambiphobic, it probably is. There's not no need to argue too much about it. Even if you didn't mean it like this, if it was perceived like this, you can just accept it, apologize, and maybe adjust further future interactions. Because often when you call out something, then it's like, yeah, but I didn't mean this like this. It doesn't really help much. It's better to learn from concerned people and adapt future behaviors. Like we all make mistakes, but we also can all like avoid making the same mistakes over and over again. The second step would be to create a more welcoming environment. And I think it's super important to make a step, an active step towards trans people. Like it's really, really hard to approach people as a trans person, for example, when you arrive in a climbing gym, because you don't necessarily know if they will be welcoming. I mean, you never know it, but as a trans person, you always have to start, okay, what if they are transphobic or ambiphobic? And therefore it really helps, and it's really pleasant if people approach us instead, so we don't have to make this really courage demanding steps. And if you don't have the courage, then again, as I discussed a bit earlier, it's really hard to enter the community and become an enduring part of it. Then another thing is to reduce your gendered interactions. And as a general rule of thumb, I would say it's always better to ask than assume. So if you're not sure about somebody's gender identity or which pronouns to use, then just go and ask them. I think like there will very, very few instances where people will be angry at you. If it's just comes from a good place, people will be okay with you asking, will be happy to actually, and they don't need to explain it for themselves. And for example, if you talk about the third person who you don't know the pronouns are for gender identity, you can use they, them pronouns until you know it. So it's always safer than just using something you assume in the binary categories. Then another thing, which is, I think, super, super important, is to support trans people in their advocacy for gender neutral facilities. And at this place, I think I want to do a small shout out to, like, there's a new training gym open in the Netherlands by Wildflower Climbing, who has recently taken this path to make gender neutral facilities. I was super happy to see it. And like, by the way, if you haven't signed up for the forest cleanup this Friday with Tiba, do it. I'll be there as well. So yeah, back to the advocating. We are such a small community of trans and non-binary climbers that we need the support of cis people. It's because, for example, in most climbing gyms where I go, I will be the only or one of two trans or non-binary people. And if we say like, oh, make gender neutral bathrooms, they will say, yeah, we don't have a lot of weight. We basically then depend on the goodwill of the staff to change this, or the owners to change this. And if more people join us as cis allies, then we can really change it. Another thing I think that's important, just when you hear like slurs or also simply misgendering, call out people for them. It's often quite violent for the concerned person when it happens. So it's very, very helpful to share the burden of calling out among concerned people and allies. And it's also super pleasant to know that other climbers have our back and that we're not alone, and that others also see things as problematic. With regard to competitions, I think it means the world to us if fellow competitors are supportive of us. It's always really lovely to see, like, for example, I play basketball in a team, and like to have opponents come to me after the game and congratulate me and be like very nice with me makes me really, really happy. And I think it's a small thing to do, but it really, really, really does a lot of difference and encourages people to continue on that path. Okay, now I'm happy to discuss any questions that you might have, and want to thank you very, very much for your attention so far. And yeah, please don't hesitate to ask anything, even if you're not like 100% sure about the vocabulary or anything. Yes.
Thank you, Electra, so much for this. It was a really good presentation, and I'm sure everybody enjoyed it. Yeah, guys, you've got this little. I think I can make your screen disappear now so that we are bigger. I don't know how to make it happen.
I can do
Oh,
it.
you can do it. Nice. We've got a question from Esther. Esther's just happy to see you in font, which is really nice. And Esther is a very lovely person, so I'm sure you're gonna enjoy it.
Yes, I'm looking forward to meeting you, Esther.
I must say that I got a little emotional during your talk, because as a non-binary climber, to have somebody else stating all of these things that are close to my heart, I think that just struck a chord, and I was just like, yeah. So it was really nice to listen to. So far, no questions, guys. Get ready with the questions. In the meantime, I would just like to say that I find it really weird. Well, how a lot of people, when it comes to gender neutral facilities, they push back against this because they say we need to protect cis women from predators. And for me, the issue here is not gender neutral facilities. The issue here is the assumption, or maybe the statistics that point to the fact that cis males are violent toward women or other genders. And do you find that a little bit like the general approach of people toward trans issues and toward, because for me, the way trans issues and non-binary issues are presented, a lot of the time, it's just to make things less about gender. While actually the cis community insists on making things more about gender.
Yeah, exactly. That's the fascinating part about it. That like I think a lot of members of the trans and non-binary communities like advocate for reducing gendered spaces, interactions in general, because it reduces the harm that is done on, for example, on people that are not out yet or that don't pass well. Like and I think it's just a counter movement basically to then basically say like, no, we need gender, we need to strengthen these spaces. But also I want to say that many people saying these are not the people that, many people that say we need to protect women's rights, we need to are often not women. It's often cis men using this as a pretext to attack trans and non-binary people.
But there are also, like, really worryingly, there are also those radical feminists who say those things, and I really don't get that. And I sometimes wonder, how should we speak to people who have those radical opinions? And to me, even the fact that they're called radical feminists is weird, because like, if your feminism doesn't include trans people, you're not a feminist. So they should be, for me, called radical weirdos, but obviously that's a bit offensive, so maybe not. But you know, how do we speak to those people who just say, no, we just don't want trans people in our community because it, like, especially like trans feminine people, because it harms our, I don't know, like the quest for women's rights?
I mean, first of all, it's very hard to speak to them in general, especially as trans people. It's hard to take this step to talk to them. I think, for example, I'm working for trans LGBTQI associations, and we really avoid like going into direct contact with them, because their argument is not really one we can discuss. It's more about they directly attack our existence as trans and non-binary people. So if your existence is challenged in such a way, it's really hard to start any sort of conversation. So I think the most critical part in addressing this issue is that they are so far, like, I mean, organizations such the LGBT Alliance in the UK or other trans exclusionary feminist associations, they live a bit in their echo chamber, which is amplified a lot by having, I think, unproportional media attention.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah, I see.
it,
Often
I,
radical opinions on very far right or very far
yeah,
left get a lot of visibility.
yeah. Exactly. For example, there's this, you probably heard about, it's the BBC policy that if you invite a trans activist on a panel nowadays, you have to invite also an anti-trans activist on it. This is like, has
It's
become
kind of like saying if you invite a tall panelist, you need to invite a short panelist.
exactly. This is a great example of, but as
Wow.
long, I think it's really hard to discuss these issues with them. I think we have to more seek the support of those who are who don't agree with them, and show them that they are actually a minority that really lives in their echo chamber, and also arrive at the point where they don't get this media attention.
Yeah, I also kind of it also kind of makes me think about what Gemma yesterday was talking in the context of sustainability and convincing people to like more sustainable living ideas. And she basically said there are those like various techniques to use in discussion. And I don't know if you watched that, but she said that some people are just not there yet to be able to listen to what we're trying to say.
Yeah.
So maybe that's just like, yeah, can't get involved in that. Maybe better not to waste your energy when there are better things to do. Okay, we've got a message from Maya. He's asking, would you recommend gyms to have a gender neutral changing room bathroom on top of the gendered ones, or as a replacement?
I mean, for bathrooms, I think it's really straightforward. For me, the answer is that I don't think you need gendered bathrooms in a climbing gym. I
Yeah.
think
I mean, we don't pee or do other things right in front of another. There is a
exactly.
cubicle.
Yeah, just have cubicles, and if you need to do your hair, I think you can stand next to a man, a woman, or a non-binary person. It's
Yeah.
like it really doesn't matter. And I mean, you don't need to do your hair at climbing so much or put makeup on anyway. So and for changing rooms, I think in the societies we grow up, it is it can be scary for many people to make the step to change, for example, in front of somebody who's of the opposite gender. Or so I think if it's possible, I mean, in the long run, I would wish for like just having one changing room, but
yeah, and just make sure that everybody's comfortable with everybody and doesn't feel like perved upon, right? Because why is it okay to accept the fact that, oh, we just accept that 50% of the society is predatory? Well, that's offensive to those people who might not be predatory but be in that category, and B, just really I don't know, like avoiding the problem, for me at least.
Yeah, that's a lot of this is just avoiding the problem of addressing predatory behaviors. Just
but maybe it would make sense to have an open space and then just like cubicles for people who are preferring to change on their own, because I think that is something that might occur regardless of gender.
Exactly, because you can just, if you need to change your top or put on a bra or something, just go into cubicle, do this. But otherwise, I think also in the long run, it would be important, for example, to change this, just to, because we have, I think, a lot of this fear of predatory behaviors that we are not used to changing, like from the beginning on in school, for example. We always used, like, it's almost a myth, the body of the different genders becomes almost mythical and a bit othered, basically. And I think if we start getting used as a society to changing in shared facilities, this can change a lot of our overall behavior in society afterwards.
And even going to what you said about changing the bra, I might have a bit of a extreme opinion on that, but to me it is very weird that we still consider breasts as something that needs to be covered. And like, for example, I know many cis women who don't mind showing their breasts, and my breasts are non-binary breasts. I don't care about them being covered or not covered. What I care about is people treating me weird because I have them.
Yeah.
So for me, it's not my problem, it's other people's problem that they have like no way to behave that wouldn't be offensive to me. So
Yeah,
but at the same time, there might be people who want to cover the top of their body, again,
exactly.
regardless of their gender.
Yeah.
So
Exactly. It might also be like helpful for, like, I think the cubicle idea is also good for people that don't, just in people in general that don't feel comfortable in their body, might
yeah,
also feel
of course.
more protected if
Or for
there's,
religious reasons,
yeah,
I guess.
exactly. Like many reasons why you would need to want to hide, but many people really don't care. I mean, so that's why I think initiatives like having just gender neutral bathrooms are also just, and changing rooms are also good initiatives to just get people used to it. And with regard to the story of the breast, I think it's true, and it was really funny for me to see, like, from one day to the other, basically.
You experienced both sides.
Exactly, my nipples became sexualized and couldn't be shown anymore. Like, really, it's like,
that must be really like identity splitting of like,
yeah, it just shows the whole absurdity of things. Like, my mind hadn't changed or anything. It was just like the regard, like the view of the other had changed about it. And I think this is something that's really important with trans, when talking about trans identity in general, is often that the view of the other is the most important things.
Yeah.
A person transitioning, a person coming out, doesn't necessarily change. I mean, they might anatomically change a bit, but it's still the same person. It's just the view that the others have of us. That's why I also mentioned the example of having roots to me explained to me suddenly. Just like literally when the first day basically I always make the joke that I grew boobs, and then suddenly people started explaining me my worm roots.
But that also, I think, applies to cis women in general and women in general, because there is this perception that the female body is somehow very sexual and therefore should be covered or something like that. It's not. It's just sexualized by the society. So it's like in the eye of the beholder, and why should anybody be held responsible for others' opinions?
And coming back to the same issue, basically, overall, like, if we just have to break the binary and break the patriarchy, I think, in order to
yes, that's a good one to finish on,
to make things more I think there's
let's just take one more question, because we've got a little bit more time here. From Alice: I live in Berlin. The gym has a mixed gender sauna where we're all naked and it's okay and respectful, but then separate changing room and toilet. And I think Alice is just saying that as an example of something that works well.
Yeah, and also shows the absurdity that you have to change them.
Oh yeah, and like Swedish people always go to the sauna naked, and nobody makes a problem.
Exactly,
out of it.
I think I'm also originally from Germany, and it's quite common to go naked to the sauna. But then, yes, as Alice said, then you go into different changing rooms, just because there's
there are those
something magical
where we
happening.
switch off the sexualization and the objectification and the patriarchy. Like in this room, 2x2 wooden sauna room, we can be who we are, but outside, back to the rules.
There's maybe this thought that everybody is sweating, that we're all equal.
Shared effort of enduring the temperature.
Exactly.
Which actually is a shared effort in sports too. So maybe sports is a good area to push things forward.
Yeah, and I definitely think so. And also now, like, for example, I have basketball training tonight, and
after this,
wow,
and you're a busy person.
I really think this, like, can change society as by making trans people participate in sports, because people get more used to it. Also, the idea of, if you have like this common passion, you have something that you share. But it's really important to enable, basically.
Totally, because over sports you connect with people that otherwise you might have nothing in common with.
Exactly.
So all right, well, thank you very much. If there isn't anything that you would like to add, perhaps there is, I think we are ready to be wrapping this up.
Yes, and the raffle, right?
Oh, the raffle. Jesus, thank you. I
I got
am
so
a little
excited
bit
about the raffle.
tired. I'm so glad you remembered, because otherwise I would need to do like another webinar of some sorts to do the raffle. Okay, let's do that quickly.
And I
Merila
think that
says
exactly.
there also been discussions about topless climbing in another boulder gym in Berlin. Oh, cool.
Yeah, and I
Actually,
think
go on.
this is something cool, just important to do, like, because we have, I always like, for example, in Netherlands, is topless climbing is often banned
For all genders.
for all genders.
And that's fine for me.
Exactly, but also like if you allow it, then just allow it also for all genders, I would say. This is.
I always have this conversation with people with breasts who say like, oh, but if you climb topless, you're going to scratch your nipples. And I was like, no, it's not possible. And then I went slab climbing. I really regretted my choices.
Yeah, like chimneying around like a volume very delicately.
Yeah, bad times, really bad times. But actually, because I'm writing a book and I was researching the history of competition in Europe, and there was a competition in the 80s when Lynn Hill participated, and she got to know, that was in 86, sorry. And she got to know that for men, there was a car as a prize for winning, but for women, there was no car. And so she asked the organizers, why isn't there a car for women? And after a little bit of back and forth, they came back to her with the answer of, when women compete topless, we will give them the same award.
Okay, yeah. I mean, let them compete topless. So like absurdity.
Yeah, like, are you rewarding men with the car because some of them are taking their tops off? Like, I was just mind blown. Right, let's do the raffle before we get too angry about things. All right, so for the raffle, let me double check what is the number range that that we are doing, so that I can tell you exactly. We've got numbers from 1 to 113, and each and every holder of the virtual pass was given a number, and we sent these over MailChimp. However, I got to know already from one person that they didn't get their number for some weird reason. MailChimp didn't deliver. So should that be the case, but your number comes up, which is in our spreadsheet, we will still email you. And then we'll have also a physical raffle when we are here together in Fontainebleau for the attendees who hold the full pass and for mentors. So let's start with a prize from Lattice Training, which is a 6-month membership in the Lattice 365 subscription program, which basically gives you access to loads of features via their Facebook page. You've got access to coaches, to nutritionists, to physios, and then also the whole library of webinars and any videos that Lattice publish, that just access to a huge training resource. It's super good. And we've got 3 of those for 6 months each. So Electra, can you give us 3 numbers from, what did we say, 100 to 100?
13. But I think there's one person who also said that they didn't get one.
Okay.
On the Q&A.
In the Q&A, they've also been a group. Chat. Sorry to ask, but I haven't got Esther. Esther, I have your number. The reason why we're not releasing the numbers and names publicly is because of GDPR, because then people, but I think it's not going to be a massive transgression if I say what number Esther, but I can't say what number Esther is, because then it will influence you. Yes, right. So, well, Esther, if it's you, I will tell you.
Okay. Then I'll start with 64.
64 for Lattice Training win. That is Lisa. Okay, another one.
91.
91. 91. Geraldine for Lattice. And one more, please.
3.
Eileen. Lattice. Fantastic. So now you had 3, 64 and 91. So these are for Lattice
Yes.
trainings, Lattice 365 subscription. And now let's give away a 1-year subscription to the premium topos in 27 crags. So that gives you access to a huge amount of topos all over the world, valid for 1 year. You can download them to use them offline if you go to an area where there is no connectivity. So it's super useful. Let's have a number, please.
And I go with 102.
102. Svenja, for the 27 crags
27.
subscription. Excellent. And now from Patagonia, we've got 3 of these books, Let My People Go Surfing. It's a memoir by Yvonne Chouinard, who is the founder of Patagonia. And this is a book that's basically, it's kind of from a perspective of a person who started a business. Yvonne Chouinard describes himself as an unlikely entrepreneur, but I think what is at the back of the book is quite a good description of it. This is the story of an attempt to do more than change a single corporation. It is an attempt to challenge the culture of consumption that is at the heart of the global ecological crisis. And it's a really good read. I love it. So we've got 3 of these. Can I have 3 numbers, please?
Yes, 14.
14. Ooh, Ashley. Okay.
And then 36.
36. Florence. And
73.
73. Maria. Book. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Electra. We have totally randomized it between the 2 of us. So we made it extremely fair, I assure everybody.
Call me RNG.
And what's RNG?
A random number generator.
Oh, you're one of the technical aware people.
Yeah.
I'm an anthropologist, so I'm lost.
I'm a lawyer by education, so it's...
Oh, okay. We really need you at the festival then. I need to talk to you about grand things that I don't understand.
Okay, yeah, I'm happy, especially if it's legal French, I can help.
Oh my God, that would be so amazing. It's wow. Yeah, I might hit you up for that. So at the physical event, we will do more raffling from our sponsors. There will be more books from Patagonia, which I'm super psyched about. Because with clothing, I find it that it's quite hard to raffle out clothing. Like it's gonna be the wrong color or the wrong size, and books like you can't go wrong with. So I'm mega excited for that. Electra, thank you so much for joining us today and for your amazing and informative presentation. Let me just double check if something in the Q&A.
I think there was Maya.
Yeah, Merle is saying that she didn't get one. But I think we didn't have Merle's number anyway. I can check which number you were, Merle, just to make sure that you are not feeling missed out. Sorry about this. I have no idea why MailChimp has played up like that. But anyhow, thank you very much. I will see you on Friday at the cleanup.
Definitely.
And have a good evening. Enjoy the basketball training.
Thank you, and good luck with the last stretch before.
I need it. Bye. Cheers.
Bye-bye.